Hi, Jackson. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you about both you and also the collection that you've created. But I think I'd like to start with you. You are the person and you are also the brand, which is actually truly what I want to talk about. How do you think about, or how do you think someone should think about how they're using their clothes and their style to project a brand? Or do you think they should be thinking about that at all?
I realized on the way here I'm not wearing anything Wiederhoeft, which like most fashion designers would like disagree with.
Yeah.
But I think there's also something very Wiederhoeft about not wearing Wiederhoeft. Because I think for me, we're the type of people who like you wear Wiederhoeft, you wear vintage, you wear the t-shirt you've had for 20 years. There's like a styling sentiment that I really appreciate, and like my approach to dressing that's a lot less like uniform. For me as a creative, I think the times in my life when I've like thought the most about my dressing is when I'm the least creatively fulfilled. And I kind of use dressing as like an outlet for finding a way to like speak a language that I like hold very dear, but maybe didn't have an outlet or like a means of working. Whereas now I feel very creatively fulfilled like all the time, which I'm really grateful for. But it means I don't honestly think much about what I'm wearing. I think what we wear inherently reveals so much about oneself. And I love sitting on the train and kind of like deconstructing what someone's like wearing. And I feel like a forensic scientist, like,
Yeah.
or like a detective on like SVU of like, you know, even just like how worn someone's shoes are in that kind of way, or just like the type of jewelry they're wearing. I think it is incredibly intimate and it's very vulnerable. No matter what you're wearing, it says a lot.
Do you think that people are thinking about that when they do it, or do you think it's more intuitive? Like, you know, I think that's what goes back to this interesting thought about a brand. Like suddenly in the world we live in today, it's like everybody is aware of what they're projecting in a different way than they used to be. I don't know how many people walk around and they're like, well, if I wear this, it'll show this, you know?
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel like that works for you?
Wiederhoeft is a very, you know, tends to be a pretty ostentatious brand. People who wear my collection tend to not be like wallflowers. You're not usually wearing Wiederhoeft to like, you know, we have star quality to like when we're wearing the pieces, you know. But I'm not that person who wants to be the center of attention most of the time. I started to wonder if I wasn't, if I didn't own Wiederhoeft, like would I wear Wiederhoeft? I feel like when I'm wearing Wiederhoeft, a lot of the times it's because I want the garments to help speak for me. Because especially in situations when I'm getting really dressed up, I tend to be like more shy. I prefer like an intimate situation. But when you're like in a public setting or something, it's like nice. For me, I find a way for the garments like say a lot on my behalf that I can't necessarily always speak on. And I get clients who similarly, especially within bridal, who are maybe nervous about being in front of a lot of people or saying their oaths, and they kind of want the garments to help tell part of the story for them. So I think that is kind of something that is done both consciously and subconsciously with my collection, which I really like love.
I think that we all have things in our closets, whether we still own them or not, but we have items in our worlds, in our lives, in our stories that have played these kind of pivotal parts. And I was curious, like, if you had a memory or an item from your closet, from any time throughout your closet that you feel like has been like, it's made you feel like you, but better.
So I worked for Tom Brown for 3 years. Is how I kind of started my career. And so every day I was in like the gray suit because that was our uniform.
Yeah.
And I actually, after I finished up at Tom, I sold all my suits on the RealReal to help pay for my first collection.
I read that.
Which was really a lovely like little investment. Thank you, Tom, for that. But I did keep one suit, my favorite suit. It's like this dark gray and white kind of like Beetlejuice stripe sack jacket and matching skirt and pants. You can wear like either. And I kind of kept that in my closet as like this like momentum of the time. And I've worn it a couple of times since then. I don't wear a lot of like suits. I was never really like the suit type so much. But occasionally if I have like a big like business meeting or I'm trying to close a deal, I don't love tailoring in the same way that Tom does, but I think there is kind of a certain part of yourself that it helps you like unpack when you're in like a really beautifully tailored suit. Tom Brown, gorgeous like striped wool suit. So I think that's kind of fun because it's a feeling that is really convenient to bring out from time to time.
And what do you feel like when you're wearing that suit?
I feel powerful and I feel very bossy. Yeah, very sassy. And like I feel like people like listen in a different way. I feel like I feel really like I read books or something in like a cool way, you know? I like books, but mostly picture books. But that still makes me feel like I read like books without pictures, which
Yeah.
isn't the case.
Do you like find yourself in Rizzoli browsing the novels or what?
I'm too busy like stomping around when I'm wearing that suit. It just like it makes you feel like so cool and just like boardroomy, you know?
How do you relate to this stuff from your life? Like, do you have a way in the back of your closet like that first t-shirt you bought in high school, or are you a collector? Are you a purge editor? Are you a purger, a hoarder? Like, how do you relate to the sort of keeping of and having of clothes, and how do you relate to building a closet?
Yeah, I think I used to be a big collector, and that was definitely my entryway into fashion before I knew I could make anything or design anything. It was like, I think the first garment I ever like bought was this like gold locket from this like antique store in Houston. And I just like, I was probably like, you know what, like 15 years old, just like in this like antique store after cross country practice. I got off the bus and just like wandered around, and it's like, I don't know, it's just there's that emotional impact when you're like, well, I have to have that, simply put.
Yeah.
And it is that first, I feel like that was the first feeling of like, oh, well, I need this thing and I can't really explain why. And I never really wore it. I still have it, of course, but I think there was like a collector's sentiment to it. I think nowadays my closet is more and more filled with things I've designed, which is really like special, and that's really satisfying. And I think a lot of my clothes that I really relate to, I've like put away into storage because I don't like dress as exorbitantly anymore. Or if I do, it tends to be like my own collection. You know, advertising what you sell is a really important marketing tactic, actually.
Totally.
But yeah, I love to collect, and I do love to like throw away. There's a lot of fun in like letting go, or just passing on. Like I'm a size 11, like women's heel. So I used to like collect so many heels. Whenever I could find an 11, it was like mine. Because you have to like pounce when you can.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to find some homes for those because it's hard to come by, but it's nice to know they're going to like good places.
And when do you know that it's like, gotta get rid of that?
When you haven't worn it in like several years. I mean, I feel connected to the things that I like helped design the most, and everything else I feel like can kind of like pass on to different hands. But it's also nice to like, there's such a gift in like letting go of things that you helped design, or, you know, things that you did create. There's a real beauty in like passing that on to people you care about.
Totally.
It's like the highest form of like, I feel like gift giving and like fashion, you know. Totally. It's very personal.
All these things, whether even when you haven't designed them, if you've lived some part of the road in them, that it's like you're giving someone a little piece of yourself or a piece of your story.
There's a magical like sentiment. And also like same with like making a garment. Like it's wild to me working in fashion to know like the number of hands that like pass over a garment before it ever touches a body, from everyone who like makes the thread to who makes the buttons, to the people who embroidered the piece, people who sewed it and steamed it and cut the fabric and hand sewed everything and like rolled the fabric around in Midtown and like just like the graders who printed out the pattern and got it to the factory.
Do you think that stuff holds energy?
Yeah. And the attitude with which like me and my team like work with the pieces, or like even in like the showroom, you know, it's like there's kind of one of each. We've spent like countless like months creating them in some cases, and you know, most of the time in appointments it's either myself or my colleague Smith who's like dressing people in the pieces. So obviously we have like, you know, labored day and night in some cases over these pieces. And so I think I love like dressing a client or like helping someone like try on a piece. It is very like intimate, and it also like it feels like I'm able to kind of like, even just the care with which you put the garment on someone, you're like going to do it in a way that shows a lot of respect for the garment, and you want the client obviously to look their best, but it is kind of this like very intimate bond you form with the pieces. I mean, there's pieces in my showroom that I made during COVID lockdown, like for my first bridal collection, like sewed in my living room back then. So it's just nice. It's very powerful, I think.
I think it is really powerful. And I think you can feel it. And when something is like, when walking into your showroom, you can feel the energy in all of the pieces. You can feel the effort that was put into all of them. You can feel the thought that's there, the ideas that are embedded in them. Like these things contain all of that. And I think when something is rigorously and beautifully and like really lovingly done, it has a different thing about it than when it doesn't. You can feel it. So for your first full collection, which was called Spooky Couture, and you created a series of Polaroids that that were sort of, as you described them, like they were like a Christmas card to your friends. You put all of your friends and all your collaborators in these pictures. And what you said was, we wanted to create this queer Christmas safe space. And the idea was that so when people went home for the holidays and maybe they were separated from their community or the community that held them, that they would see those images and they would feel strong and they would feel like connected and remember the feelings of love and support around them. And that took these clothes and sort of helped them become their most glorious selves. And I loved that project, and I loved the sentiment in that project so much. And I thought it was such a wonderful way to think about what clothes do for people. And I wanted to know, how that project came to be, and what your point of view is on how we use clothes and style to remind people who they are, and how that works for you.
Yeah, that was right after my first collection. We actually did that photo shoot in my apartment, which was also my like studio at the time. So it was very like, and I love Christmas. I'm like a big Christmas freak. So I had like decorated for Christmas anyway, and like the tree and I love making like the paper chains and everything. So it just felt, it was like the first Wiederhoeft like holiday party also in a way. And just kind of that idea of, it almost basically was like a holiday party with like photography and like a thought behind it, which is kind of like, I was telling someone recently, it's like people who are my friends, I end up like becoming collaborator. I bring them into the work, and then my people I collaborate with, I end up becoming friends with, because like there isn't a lot of separation between like personal life and professional life and like fashion and art, I think. But especially for me, it's like if I feel that creative impulse, it's like, oh, come into my home. Like that's kind of like how it feels. Like I get home all the time actually, and I always accidentally use the key for my showroom to my front door of my apartment. It's like it taps the same like space, my showroom as like my apartment.
Your showroom feels like your home, for sure.
It is.
Like without a doubt. And you move through that space in that way, which, is not always the case. And I think that's unique to you. And it's not that it's never that way, but I think it is kind of unique. So that makes sense.
It's my favorite place in the world.
That's awesome.
But yeah, kind of, I think that feeling, that was kind of the first time where it felt like, doing something creative in the home, and kind of, I worked a lot of the photos from that shoot are like taken in my living room, which then, the showroom, I used to take showroom appointments in my living room before I had a showroom, but then that kind of like transitioned into 38th Street. So it does feel like, now that you mentioned it, kind of this like consistent line of like this like intimate kind of like homely feeling. Yeah,
you can feel it. And then I think what was so striking and interesting about that idea is that I think we all do I do for certain, I can speak for myself, a certain amount of sort of fashion code switching. Like I'll wake up in the morning and be like, who am I seeing today? Where am I going? What am I wearing? And how am I going to use that to sort of connect or communicate? And what I thought was so tender about this idea was the idea that like, if you have to go into a space where you don't feel, where you may have to sort of shut down a certain part of yourself or not reveal a certain part of yourself in order to feel comfortable or make the people around you feel comfortable, how do you dress for that? Like, do you ever remember a moment where you like adjusted your style to suit environment that you were going to, and how did you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I grew up like going to Catholic school, so I had a lot of training and like kind of like being uncomfortable and like clothing, you know what I mean? A lot of like Sperry's and like that khaki pants and stuff.
Yeah.
But I didn't really have like the language, but I used to like get up with some of my girlfriends who went to the all girls Catholic school down the street, and we would like bop around town and like clothes we like took out of the theater department like closet, So I think for me that was kind of the early age when I realized like, if you just like, steal one of the Macbeth costumes and run outside and like run around for a bit, like, luckily I went to school downtown, and so we would just like escape and like do our thing, but also like come back, and drama club was always like a great space to like bring people into like the fun. So that was kind of a very early moment of realizing the power and the transformative ability. Actually, I think transformative was something I realized maybe back then, especially with the costume design, transformation felt important. But I think as I get older, it's more about this like revelation rather than like transforming someone. So
it's really interesting because I feel like you're using the clothes to reveal someone, and I think there is an idea of clothes that can reveal us, and there are also clothes that can obscure us. And so how do you know the difference? Like, how do you tune into yourself and to your own voice and know what's going to reveal you versus what's going to sort of obscure you?
I think I have an experience now in kind of being able to tell other people if they're being revealed or obscured.
Yeah.
I think I actually don't know if I am so good at that for my own self in dressing, because especially if I'm running a bridal appointment, it's with someone generally who I've never met. I've met them maybe 20 minutes ago. But you can tell when someone puts something on and they look in the mirror and they just like, their posture is very like soft, and they're just kind of the way they move about the room, the way they speak. And, you know, I can say to someone like, I don't know you, but you seem very at ease, where it's actually very easy to see that in someone else. And I think seeing it in ourselves is often like harder, you know, hard to take your own advice in a lot of like cases. But I think it is really in someone else. I've had a lot of practice in just seeing like, you know, when you're at ease. And I think that's like, I was talking to my therapist about it actually, and just like how bridal is somewhat like therapy, where you're kind of just like helping someone explore something in themselves and kind of just like guiding someone to it without like telling them.
One question I have about you and Tom Brown, because in so many ways he is really mining like notions of masculinity, and your work in so many ways mines like all the archetypes of femininity, but then there's something so kindred in the way you meet those things. Talk to me a little bit about how you think about femininity and your relationship to sort of playing with it.
Yeah, I was thinking recently about this as well. And I mean, femininity as a concept is very core to like the work of Wiederhoeft. And I think the Wiederhoeft client, or the person who appreciates Wiederhoeft, tends to be intrigued by femininity, but not necessarily defined by it. And I think there's like a real study to it. But I think also I, as a person, really love women. And I think that's something that like I've realized, it seems obvious, but I think it's not always the case in like fashion. And I think working in bridal has really like opened my eyes to just, especially if you meet someone who's shopping for a wedding dress and they're like, I've dreamed of this since I was a little girl, you know, and it's kind of like, wow. And then you meet someone who's like, oh, I want to make sure I'll look good in this. I'll be happy with this decision of my wedding dress 40 years from now when I'm like a grandma. And it's like, oh, wow. And it's like, we're talking about like this idea of like the feminine experience like captured in like one garment from like, you know, birth to death.
Yeah.
And I think there's a real joy I find in helping people kind of like, even within like menswear that we do, there is this kind of idea of like femininity and kind of examining, you know, archetypal ideas of femininity. I think post-gender thought is like really core to what I do. So I think that is kind of like the crux of femininity celebrated through a post-gender lens.
Totally.
Which is really exciting to me, and just like I could go on and on.
How do you think about the mix of masculine and feminine in your own work or in your own style? And how do you, because that's something that's changed so much in the world really pretty recently, how those two things are getting mashed together. And out there in the world, there's so many gorgeous examples just running around of like really what that mashup looks like. Or I don't even know if it's a mashup. It's like something on a spectrum, you know?
Yeah. I think what I've kind of noticed for myself recently is I feel, for example, I went to the CFDA Awards 2 weeks ago and I wore this like corseted black like look, and it's, you know, definitely leaning more into like feminine ideas, but most of the time I'm dressed pretty like casual, you'd say like more in like a masculine way. And I kind of find in my life that the celebratory moments are where I like desire to feel the most like feminine. And I think the more kind of like casual moments are when I hope to feel like more masculine. And I think for me, probably more relates to like objective thoughts surrounding femininity. I think for me, femininity is like beautiful, and it is celebratory, and it is like just majestic. And I think that there is such like a celebratory aspect to so many archetypal like thoughts around femininity, whereas to me, masculinity is more in like this everydayness that still has like its quiet beauty. Yeah, I feel closer to God in like a feminine piece, I think, ultimately. And I think that kind of like, to go back to like personal style and like how we dress ourselves, I feel like in those moments where I want to feel the most just like radiant, that's where I'm headed. Yeah.
You said something in an article about your own personal style that was like they asked you to describe 3 words to describe your style, and the 2 that really stood out to me were self-aware and fancy. And I thought they were such a great combination, because it's like self-aware is sort of like you're not trying to prove anything. And fancy is always like, when you get fancy, you're giving it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're sort of at odds. But tell me about like self-aware and fancy as they
Yeah.
relate to your own personal celebrity.
Yeah. Fancy is a great thought. I think it relates to like glamour. And my collection I did for fall 24 was also this like glamour dressing, which I think is like very like ladies of Madison Ave, like this like outfit based dressing that's just like so fantastic, which I think is somewhat out of like style in this moment, but I think is like kind of like the ultimate just diva brilliant moment to have like your purse, your shoes, your nail polish, like every single thing like relates back. It's fabulous. And I think it is fancy, and I think like it's so special. Self-aware, I think there's just like a not shamelessness, but perhaps like a poetry in motion kind of like feeling to it, where it is just like it's more like journaling than like trying to like it's a nonfiction event to be like self-aware and like you're dressing, whereas fancy maybe is a little bit fictional. And those are kind of the two sides to the story.
All right. So you've said a bunch, and I saw this a bunch, that these days you really rely on a uniform. If you were going to make this ideal uniform that was like the uniform that you've done now, plus some key indicators, can you imagine what little things you would layer in and why?
I think the more time goes on, I love kind of like having a more minimal approach, especially like right now within bridal. If I'm in a room with a client, like I want to like somewhat disappear. And I don't want to like the client to like leave like even feeling like they like learn that much about me. I want to create experience for them. You know what I mean? So I think there is like I've tried to like approach subtlety or not even like dress to like in a way that draws attention, like if I'm in a bridal appointment. And that's like a really fun like meditation on like bridal and like that experience, I think. So I think it's giving like black jeans, black shirt. Honestly, I love tattoos, and I've been like working on like, that, and that's like my long-term goal. I feel like being like covered in tattoos is kind of like my ultimate, like feels like a uniform in a way that's like very like artistic. And like it was interesting at CFDA Awards, I was like, this is a really like untattooed like room. Like I feel like fashion people and like, a lot of like more like people who are actors and stuff, you don't usually see people with tattoos because they have to like work and like be different characters or something, or fashion types. Some people have tattoos, but not a lot actually. And so I feel like that's almost something I've been thinking about, is the uniform.
I love that. I love tattoo as uniform.
Yeah.
If you have 3 items that are sort of over the course of your whole life, kind of always or kind of in your rotation in some way or another, 3 kind of pieces of fashion, and why? Like, why are those the things you always go back to?
Oversized pair of jeans. I think there's something really like fantastic, and like also I feel like a princess when I'm walking down the stairs with my oversized jeans and I kind of like pick them up, you know what I mean? So they're not like scraping on the subway stairs. I think a statement coat is something that like I've always been obsessed with and always like will, and I think was some of the first ways I like really good way to buy into fashion, like at a sample sale, when it's like what can I like fit into, it's like the statement coat category. But it is just like a fabulous way to like wear like an all black kind of outfit with like a fabulous coat covered in something beautiful. I don't know if this counts. I feel like it's a personal piece of jewelry that someone has like given to you that like belonged to them at one point. I think my dear friend Smith, their mom gave me a watch that they had for like years, and that's like something I always wear like for like big events, or like just my grandfather's like dog tags I have from like when he was in the army, and like that's like a very like personal thing, or just like things of that nature where it's like pieces that someone gave to you that touched their skin for like a long time feels like really intimate and special.
Where do you go consistently for style inspiration? What like when you're like need to get some ideas?
The R train for sure. Like it really turns out if you just kind of like sit down, like it's a movie, it's fantastic. Like so many unforeseen like situations that are all around us, and you're just kind of sitting in front of it and it's like happening. It's fabulous.
I've loved having you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I want 3 new words that describe
3 new words.
Wiederhoeft, the person and the style.
I think 3 words would be specific, careful, and carefree.
Love it.
Vagueness is out, specificity is in a
Oh
big
my
way.
God.
That's my manifesto for fall 25 runway, which we're doing right now.
I'm going to be a total devotee of that. I think that seems true.